someone had asked me that morning, just before I opened the email, how I felt about Caleb, I would have said something like, "I'm over it. We've both moved on. It's in the past." And I would have believed it. I was standing in the kitchen, still in my robe, stirring honey into my tea while Lucas scrolled through the news beside me. Our dog Baxter was pawing at the back door, and sunlight was streaming across the tile like some subtle promise of a normal, uneventful Thursday. I had just gotten off a call with a bridal florist. Lucas was talking about a weekend trip to Vermont. We were 8 months into our engagement, 3 weeks from sending out formal invitations. Life was steady, safe, predictable. And then I opened my email. The subject line read, "Urgent, about Caleb." I remember blinking twice. My hand froze on the mouse. It was from Jonah, one of Caleb's old roommates, the one who used to crash on our couch after late shifts and steal my almond milk without asking. I hadn't heard from him in almost 4 years. "Hi Nina, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I thought you should know. Caleb's in the hospital, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They say he has a few weeks left. He asked if I had any way of contacting you. I didn't want to assume, but you were important to him. No pressure. Just letting you know." Jonah. My breath caught in my chest. I reread the message twice, then a third time. And all I could think was, I didn't even know he was sick. I hadn't seen Caleb in 3 years. We'd spent nearly 6 years together before that. 6 years of beautiful highs and devastating lows. He was magnetic, infuriating, sensitive, reckless, brilliant, and chronically afraid of being loved too well. I gave him all of me, and he gave me just enough to make me stay. Until one day I didn't. Walking away from Caleb had been like amputating a part of myself. It didn't bleed right away. It just throbbed, and then it left a phantom ache, especially in the quiet hours. I went to therapy. I journaled. I deleted every playlist that reminded me of him. I took up running. I moved to a new part of town. I stopped looking for his name in places I used to find it. Eventually I met Lucas, the complete opposite of Caleb. Steady, patient, safe. A man who didn't need fixing. And I had built a new life on the fragile faith that what I had with Caleb was finally completely over. But death has a way of dragging old things into the light. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the message for maybe an hour. Lucas noticed I had gone quiet. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just an old college friend. Nothing important." A lie. But one I told with so much ease, it scared me. That night, after Lucas fell asleep, I sat in the bathroom with the lights off and reread Jonah's email again. Caleb, dying, stage 4. 3 years of silence, and now he wanted to see me? Why? What could he possibly need from me at the end? What did I still owe him? And yet, the thought of him dying without closure, alone in some sterile hospital bed, never getting to say goodbye, never knowing that, despite everything, I had once loved him enough to drown for him. I couldn't bear it. The next morning, I called in sick. I packed an overnight bag. Told Lucas I had a last-minute team offsite at a partner hospital 2 towns over. I kissed his cheek, pet Baxter on the head, got in the car, and drove toward the past I had buried. A part of me knew I shouldn't have gone. That opening the door would change something I might never be able to close again. But I also knew this. If I didn't go, if I let him die without seeing me, I would carry that silence like a wound for the rest of my life. And no matter what else happened, no matter the cost, I wasn't willing to live with that kind of unfinished goodbye. The hospital was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it just looked that way through the haze of nerves and memory. I checked in at the front desk using a fake excuse about being a family friend. The nurse didn't question it. She pointed me toward the oncology wing, room 313. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted lilies. My footsteps slowed as I neared the door. The last time I saw Caleb, he was storming out of my apartment, yelling that I was trying to control him with love. I had stood at the window afterward, watching his car disappear into traffic, telling myself it was the last time I'd cry for him. And now here I was, walking back into his orbit, one last time. I knocked gently. A voice, thin and cracked. "Yeah?" I opened the door. He looked like someone I used to know. Gaunt, pale, tubes in his arm, hollow cheekbones. But his eyes, God, his eyes were still the same. Gray-green with a flicker of mischief that, even now, hadn't completely dimmed. "Nina," he rasped, disbelief blooming across his face. "Hi." I whispered, stepping inside. For a second, we just stared at each other. And then he smiled. It wasn't strong. It wasn't confident, but it was real. You came. I wasn't sure I should, I admitted. I wasn't sure you would. We talked for hours, not about what happened to us, not at first. We talked about ridiculous things. Our barista who used to draw dragons in the foam, our road trip to Oregon that ended with a flat tire and a raccoon in the tent, the Halloween we dressed as Mulder and Scully and ended up solving someone else's argument at a party. Then we got quieter. He told me about the diagnosis, the missed signs, the maybe it's just stress excuses until it was too late. I always thought I'd die in a stupid way, he said, smiling darkly. Like choking on a gummy worm or falling off a roof trying to hang lights. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. He didn't say much after that. Just listened as I talked about my job, my dog, my life with Lucas, though I left out his name. I could see something flicker in Caleb's eyes when I mentioned someone else, but he didn't press. Finally, as the sky outside turned lavender, he reached for my hand. I never stopped loving you, you know, he said. I looked away. Caleb? I don't want you back, he said gently. I know I don't deserve you. I just didn't want to leave this world without telling you. I squeezed his hand. There are moments where time stretches. Not in a magical way, but in that awful suspended manner when two realities hang in the air, one you can walk away from, and one you step into, knowing it will cost you. This was that moment. Around midnight, the nurse came in to adjust his IV. I stood to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. Please, he whispered. Just stay. Just tonight. I don't want it to die alone. That sentence broke something in me. It didn't matter that we hadn't spoken in years. It didn't matter that I was engaged. It didn't matter that part of me knew that staying would unravel everything I'd built. He was dying, and he didn't want to die alone. So I stayed. I curled up in the chair beside his bed, our fingers still intertwined. The machine hummed, the lights dimmed, and in the silence, he whispered stories from his childhood, little regrets, things he never told anyone. Then he fell asleep. I watched his chest rise and fall, slow, steady, then slower. And sometime just before dawn, it stopped. I didn't scream, I didn't sob. I just sat there, his hand still in mine, as the machine flatlined. A nurse rushed in, called a code, tried to resuscitate, even though we both knew it was over. I signed the papers. The attending doctor asked if I was the partner. I didn't correct her. I left the hospital as the sun was rising, eyes hollow, bag heavy, phone still on airplane mode. And as I drove home, back to Lucas, back to the truth, I knew something had shifted forever. Because I had just held a man as he died, and lied to the man who loved me now. Later that night, after Lucas was gone, I stood in our bedroom surrounded by absence. His jacket was missing from the hook by the door. His cologne wasn't on the dresser. The toothbrush holder suddenly looked off balance. It was remarkable, I thought, how quickly a person can disappear from a place they once filled. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring he left behind. Not angrily, not dramatically, just quietly. I held it in my hand and remembered the day he gave it to me, how his hands trembled, how he'd practiced the words, how certain he was about forever. And now forever had been reduced to a small silver circle on my palm. It didn't even feel warm. A day passed, then two. On the third day, I received a text from his sister. I don't know what you did, but Lucas won't even say your name. He said you made your choice. I hope it was worth it. I didn't reply. What could I possibly say? That it wasn't worth it? That losing him was worse than losing Caleb? It wasn't. It was different. Painful in a new way. Caleb had left me with grief. Lucas left me with judgment. One felt natural. The other felt like exile. I replayed our final conversation so many times, I could recite it backwards, every pause, every glare, every word that made me question if I'd been selfish or just brave. And slowly a realization crept in, not bitter, not cruel, just honest. Lucas didn't leave because I betrayed him. He left because I stepped outside the version of me he'd built in his head. And in that version, I was safe, predictable, easy to love. But in real life, I was messy and loyal in complicated ways. And willing to make sacrifices that couldn't be explained in neat little boxes. I wasn't what he expected. And maybe that scared him. Maybe it would scare anyone. I started therapy again. My first words were, I chose to be there when someone I once loved died, and I lost someone else because of it. The therapist, a soft-voiced woman named Marla, looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked, "Would you change it if you could go back?" And the answer came before I could stop it. No. Because I think there's something worse than losing someone, and that's abandoning someone who needed you in their final hour, just to protect your own reputation. She nodded, and for the first time in days, I felt seen. I thought the hard part was over once Lucas walked out. I thought I had already lost the one person whose opinion mattered most. I was wrong, because in the weeks that followed, I learned something brutal. The world rarely separates morality from optics, and to most people, I hadn't chosen compassion. I had chosen betrayal. The first blow came from social media. Lucas didn't post anything directly, but his silence spoke volumes. A photo of him moving boxes into his brother's place. A vague caption. Turns out the person I was building a future with was still haunted by her past. The comments flooded in. "You deserve better, bro. Dodged a bullet. Can't build love with someone still stuck in someone else's arms." No names, no direct attacks, but everyone knew, and some didn't mind naming me directly. I got DMs from people I barely knew. "I heard what you did. Shameful. You couldn't just let the past die? Was the goodbye worth the grave you dug for your relationship?" I deleted the apps, not to escape blame, but to protect whatever fragments of peace I had left. Then came work. A colleague, one I had shared wine with at office parties, cornered me in the break room. "You okay?" she asked, not unkindly. "I will be," I said. She hesitated. "I heard about Caleb." I didn't ask how. Gossip always finds its channels. She said, "Some people think what you did was really selfless." I raised an eyebrow. "Some?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Others think you wanted to feel like the main character one last time." That one hurt more than the Instagram comments, because it came from someone who had hugged me at my engagement party. I realized then, some people only love you when you make choices that comfort them. Then there was Caleb's family. I hadn't expected flowers or thank yous, but I also hadn't expected a message from his sister, Erin. "You weren't family. You shouldn't have been the one to sign off on anything. We found out through the hospital report that you were there when he passed. It wasn't your place." I stared at the email, unsure what to write back. I had signed his DNR because the nurse asked who was with him, because no one else came, because she thought I was his person. In that moment I was. But Erin's email made me feel like a trespasser at my own grief, so I didn't respond. Some truths don't survive translation. The final crack came when my mother, never one for confrontation, called and said, "I don't know what to tell people when they ask why Lucas left." "What am I supposed to say, Nina?" It wasn't judgmental, it was tired. I could hear it in her voice, the weariness of trying to explain a daughter who never did things the easy way. I almost apologized. Almost. But then I stopped myself. Because here's what no one wanted to understand. I didn't do it for closure. I didn't do it for drama. I didn't even do it for Caleb. I did it because I couldn't ignore someone dying alone. Because I had the capacity to show up when no one else did. Because if compassion cost me convenience, comfort, or even love, then maybe those things were never mine to begin with. I moved out of the apartment, sold the ring, I started working remotely, took long walks with Baxter, kept a journal. There was no big epiphany, no new love interest, no cinematic redemption, just quiet. And in that quiet, I started writing. One night, I posted a short essay on a forum under an anonymous handle. What if compassion looks like betrayal to everyone who doesn't understand it? What if the most radical thing you can do isn't stay loyal to the living, but be present for the dying, even if it makes you look like the villain? It went viral. Hundreds of comments. Some furious, some moved, some saying they finally felt understood. And I thought, maybe this story isn't just mine. Maybe I'm not the only one who lost something for choosing kindness. Maybe none of us are alone in that. A year has passed. 1 whole year since I walked into that hospital room and made a choice that cost me everything. My engagement, my reputation, my carefully curated life. And still, I would do it again. Not because I'm proud of the fallout, not because I enjoy being misunderstood, but because I've come to understand something deeper. Some actions are judged not by their intentions, but by the discomfort they cause others. And mine? Mine made a lot of people uncomfortable. In the months following Caleb's death, I tried to explain. Once, to Lucas. I emailed him a letter I never got a response to. In it, I wrote, "You asked me if it was worth it." I couldn't answer then. I was too raw. But now I can tell you, it wasn't about worth. It was about being the kind of person I could live with. The kind who shows up, the kind who stays even when staying hurts. He never replied, and maybe that silence was his own answer. I stopped trying to fix the story people told about me. Stopped correcting the narrative, because there will always be people who think love is black and white, that loyalty can be measured by where you slept, and what you said, and who you told. But there are some things they don't teach you in romance novels, like how complicated grief can be, how kindness sometimes wears the costume of betrayal, how sometimes the most loving thing you can do is not for the person you're with, but for the part of you that refuses to go numb. I now live in a much smaller place. No shared closet, no engagement photos on the wall, just me, my dog, and a quiet kind of peace I didn't know I was allowed to claim. I volunteer part-time at a hospice center. The first time I sat beside a woman in her final hours, she looked at me and said, "Are you a nurse?" I smiled and said, "No, I'm just here so you're not alone." She squeezed my hand, and in that moment I understood. Maybe I lost my place in someone's future, so I could hold space in someone's final chapter. And that is not a small thing. Sometimes I still miss Lucas. Not the man who walked out, but the version of us that might have been. If the world were simpler. If hearts didn't break so easily. If understanding came before judgment. But then I remember. He didn't leave because I cheated. I didn't. He left because I didn't let him decide which parts of me were acceptable, because I made a choice without asking for his permission. And that's not betrayal. That's agency. I think about Caleb sometimes too. Not with longing, not with regret, just with a soft ache. He made a mess of our relationship, but in the end he was honest, raw, unfiltered, and in that hospital room stripped of ego and bravado, he became something he'd never let himself be when we were together. Real. And that night I got to see him. Not the boy who ran, not the man who hurt me, but the soul. Tired, afraid, and so deeply human, he asked for me, not to fix him, not to forgive him, just to be there, and I was. So to anyone reading this and wondering, was it worth it? Yes. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Because I can live with being judged, I can live with losing someone who couldn't understand, but I couldn't live with knowing I turned away from someone in their final hour, just to keep my hands clean. And if that makes me the villain in someone else's love story, so be it. I know who I am, and I know what I did, and I would still choose compassion. Even if it cost me love, even if it cost me everything. Because not all good choices feel good. Some just feel right. Some nights I still wake up thinking about his hand in mine. Not Lucas's, Caleb's. Not the way it used to hold me years ago, when love was young and loud and reckless. But the way it trembled in mine at the very end, light, fragile, the grasp of a man who had nothing left to prove or pretend. And in those moments I don't feel guilt. I feel stillness. I feel grace. Because I know not everyone gets to show up for something like that. Not everyone has the chance to give someone their final moment of peace. And while I lost many things, my relationship, my place in certain people's lives, even my comfort, I kept that moment. It's mine. Unshakable, unstealable. If I could talk to the version of myself from a year ago, the woman staring at the hospital email with shaking hands, I'd tell her this. Go, you're going to lose things you thought you needed. But you'll find something stronger. A quiet kind of courage. The ability to live with yourself. I've learned since then that doing the right thing doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence, with distance, with a door closing in your face. But not every act of goodness is meant to be recognized. Some are just meant to be done. I'm not a hero. I'm not a martyr. I'm just a woman who sat beside death, held its hand and said, "You don't get to take him in fear." And if that's something people can't understand, I no longer feel the need to make them. Because I didn't lose everything. I chose something. And when the world demanded I stay clean, polished, and predictable, I chose messy, raw, uncomfortable humanity. And that, I've come to believe, is not a failure. It's the truest thing I've ever done.